All right, all right. Good morning, everybody. Giving you a quick moment to get everybody connected here. We're taking a look around the amazing Hendy Woods State Park. And today we have a very special webinar for you today. We are going to be talking all about California's redwoods, and it's going to be a battle royale between the coast redwoods and the giant sequoias. But for right now, I wanted to give you a moment and talk a little bit about our California Adventure Pass. So, California Adventure Pass, if there are any fourth graders out there, we're very excited because guess what? As California's fourth grade students, you get a chance to visit 54 state parks all for free for day use. So come out and visit 54 different state parks. You can get that pass at parks.ca.gov/adventure pass. And yeah, this grants you entry to 54 different parks, all regionally distributed throughout California. And today's participating parks, both Hendy Woods as well as Calaveras Big Trees, is well, we are here. We are here to explore for free. So go ahead and get your pass. But I'm going to give you a quick view around this amazing forest today. This is Hendy Woods State Park. This park has 845 acres of amazing coast redwood forest to explore. And we are going to be talking a lot about these amazing trees, the coast redwoods. And we're also going to be learning a lot about how these trees actually protect us against climate change. These forests are really amazing in that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera around to introduce myself because you're probably wondering who's talking today. Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Yahelka. I'm the park interpreter here at Hendy Woods State Park. And we are expected to be joined by Lily out at Calaveras Big Trees any moment now. She is getting her connection established, and we'll be joined by her shortly here. But let's just talk about the amazing coast redwoods. See, we in California have some amazing trees. For one, we have the coast redwood, our number one contender in this fight. I tell you what, these trees are known as one of two California's state trees. And what these trees are very impressive because they're so um, well adapted to an amazing ecosystem, to an amazing environment. These trees, well, they are pretty impressive. They've shared lots of history with us as Californians. And when we think about California history, we often have a very narrow view. I've been thinking about history having started during the early colonization of California, of the Europeans, as they made their way west during the California Gold Rush. But for thousands of years before that, we recognize that this is the ancestral land of the Native American tribes. Here at Hendy Woods State Park, located way up in Mendocino County, we recognize that this is the land of the Northern Pomo tribe, but also home of the amazing coast redwoods. Now, these trees, well, they were used as a resource, as something that we could build our first camps and build our first cities using the lumber of the redwood. Now, these trees are so well adapted, they can survive for a long, long time, reaching ages of over 2,000 years. And well, very well adapted to a long lifespan. If I were to measure this tree, drawing a line straight from one side of it all the way through the middle of the tree to the other side, I would find out that this tree, well, this tree is about 14 foot wide. But that's not what makes the coast redwood so special. These trees are the keepers of an ecosystem, natural wonders of the world. In fact, these are the world's tallest trees. Coast redwood, there's nothing that grows taller than a coast redwood. So you go out to a redwood forest, you spend a whole lot of time looking up. I wonder, has anybody ever been to a redwood forest before? Give me a thumbs up if you've seen some redwoods before. All right, excellent. I see hearts. I see lots of people using our expressions. It's good to see so many people out there. Well, if you go to a redwood forest, you know that these trees, well, nothing grows taller. These trees are super tall, reaching heights of over 350 feet. As we scale up this thick trunk with all that thick furrowed bark, well, we start to see our very first branch right around there. That's already 100 foot up the trunk of the tree, and it continues to grow way up high as these trees reach heights of over 350 feet tall. Yes, very, very impressive trees at that. In fact, these trees are so well adapted that they can reach ages of over 2,000 years old. Over 2,000 years old. Amazing trees at that. Now, today we are going to be learning a lot about these trees and learning a lot about how these trees are connected to their environment. I'm hoping that Lily gets a chance to jump on here. We're kind of stretching, hoping that she can reestablish her connection. But for now, I guess let's learn a little bit more about these coast redwoods. So these trees are super well adapted. They can survive for over 2,000 years old. And, well, the root system is also very, very impressive. Let's take a look over here. So, of course, roots for a redwood tree, well, this is the means of staying upright. The roots have lots of different functions, jobs to do. And the roots of a redwood, of course, anchor the tree in the ground, allowing it to drink up water and nutrients. But let me just show you how big it is when I'm standing way over here. Check this out. All right. Really see me? Wow. So these amazing trees, their roots extend about 100 foot from the trunk of the tree, extending out in all directions. And, well, as they anchor the tree in the ground, they absorb water and nutrients, allowing the tree to get everything that it needs. Their roots only extend out laterally. They really don't go too far deep into the soil, being that these trees actually are able to anchor the tree in the ground, but they've absorbed lots of nutrients from below them. Oh, wait, who's this?
Why,
I see
hello
we are
there.
joined by Lily at Calaveras Big Trees. I was just telling everybody, all of our viewers were wanting to know all about the amazing coast redwood trees, the world's tallest trees. And let me tell you, I hear that you have some pretty impressive trees at that as well. So
Yes,
tell me a little bit about your trees now.
yes, we do. So, hello, everybody. My name is Lily. I am over at Calaveras Big Trees State Park. And while we don't have the very tallest trees ever, which are the coast redwood, we do have the very biggest trees ever. The giant sequoia. Maybe you've heard of this tree. And when we're talking about big, we're talking about the fact that they can be really, really wide, as you can see from this tree right here, as well as incredibly tall. You got to merge those two things together to get the overall biggest tree. Now, another couple cool things about giant sequoias, they can live for an incredibly long time. They can live over 3,200 years old, which, by the way, I know for sure that is older than how the coast redwoods can be. And they live in a fairly, I would say, I think that people would agree, more hardcore environment. That's because I am currently in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They're kind of famous for being pretty much that dividing line between California and Nevada. Now, I'm not way, way up at the tippy most top of those mountains. I'm currently just around 5,000 feet, but giant sequoias like it in that sweet spot between about 4,000 and 8,000 feet elevation. And guess what? We get snow. All right. We have to deal with snow every single winter. Last winter, I mean, we all had some crazy rainstorms, but we had snow that was so thick, we had to close the park for a few days because it was so intense. And the giant sequoias like that. So I don't know, Steve. I think that's overall pretty cool and a bit more hardcore.
Look, okay, so right, your trees are old. They reach ages of 3,200 years old. But here's the thing: I one little secret power of the root system of the redwoods, the coast redwoods, that is that, when this tree fell down 200 years ago, still here, hasn't fully decayed yet, but it left a little bit of its root system in the ground. In fact, this tree is still alive because this right here is a regenerated sprout, a sprout that came from the existing root system that was well established in the soil. So, I mean, talk about 3,200 years old. This tree was 1,200 when it fell. 200 years later, we have a 200-year-old tree growing from it. So can we really judge the age of the tree by the trunk itself? What about that root system? So here's the thing, but I mean, you mentioned that you got lots of snow up there, and snow pack is pretty important to the coast, or to the giant sequoias, of course. But here's the thing, these trees are super tall, reaching into the clouds to unlock a secret resource for water. In fact, they can drink water out of the sky through a process known as foliar uptake. That's drinking leaves, or drinking water from their leaf system. And I also happen to know that you at Calaveras Big Tree, well, actually, historically, we're experiencing less snowpack. So I don't know about your giant sequoias and how they're going to fare with less snowpack. What you got to say about that?
You're right. With climate change, there has been lots of fluctuations in the snowpack. Luckily, over the last couple of years, it's been pretty good. But man, if you go back in time, especially 2020, 2021, before that even, it was really, really bad. So the giant sequoias have been pretty stressed out about that. You got a good point, Steve. But you just talked about how your trees can get water from their needles, which is super duper cool. I know that fog that provides that water has been far less as well because of climate change. So really, when you say giant sequoias aren't doing so hot, unfortunately, no, coast redwoods aren't doing so hot as well.
That's right. I guess here's the thing. The challenge is, yeah, we have been experiencing a little less fog. I've just been really enjoying myself out in the sun a little bit more. More sun, more warmer temperatures. Oh, it's been like summertime and spring already. But this kind of brings up if both of our trees are not faring so hot against the effects of climate change, well, maybe it's not us that should be competing against each other. We shouldn't be arguing over, this sibling rivalry between whose tree is bigger and whose tree is taller, and all these adaptations that just make them both amazing California state trees. We should really be just teaming up and fighting against climate change.
You know what? That's a super fair point. They're the California redwoods. They're such cool trees, and it can be pretty fun to fight about which tree is overall better. But honestly, the real enemy is climate change. So, in this program, we're going to cover climate change. We're going to cover how actually our two trees, the two California redwoods, these classic siblings, actually one of the top fighters against climate change, how that all works. We're going to talk about what the state's doing to help these trees, what you and your community can do to help them as well. And also in the Q&A, we'll be monitoring that because we're going to take turns talking about the various topics. So if you have a quick question, we'll try to answer in the Q&A. If it's a bigger question, when it's the next person's turn to talk, we'll try to address that question. If there's hundreds of questions, if there's dozens of questions, we might not be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best. And also just keep in mind that we'll be using the Q&A at the end to have a little bit of a discussion about what you all can do for climate change. So get yourself ready.
So Lily, so climate change is a very, very complex topic, and a lot of people really just might not understand everything that's going on with climate change. And I know that you know a lot about it, and would love to share a little bit about what's bringing us to this point where our temperatures are getting warmer and our weather patterns are off balance.
Yes, I will get to that. So, climate change, big, broad, scary topic. I don't blame you if you're a little bit intimidated by it. So let's just break it down a little bit. The point of climate change is that the Earth is overall heating up, And that's because we humans are burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are things like coal and oil, gas, specifically things like gasoline. And it's called fossil fuels because way back many millions of years ago, we're all familiar with the dinosaurs. They're pretty cool. There were also these giant old plants. There was lots of algae. There's all that stuff growing back then. But it got covered up under layers and layers and layers and layers of earth, pressurized. All this stuff was happening to it until it became this kind of tarry, oily substance that, especially starting like mid 1850s, what we call like the Industrial Revolution, a little bit before that, a little bit after that, and onward, we realized if we burn it, we could get a lot of energy out of it, which means that we can do things like have cars, we could have factories, we can have electricity. We can get so much power out of burning these fossil fuels, just like you can see right here. Now, the problem is when you have a plant like this one burning a lot of coal, let's say, or maybe something else, that releases something called greenhouse gases. All that means that these are gases that can get stuck in the atmosphere and they can create what we like to think of like a heat trapping blanket. So these are gases like maybe carbon dioxide, maybe like methane. And naturally, there are some in our atmosphere, and that's good. If we didn't have them, we would be cold a lot more often because all those sun rays would just come in and bounce out, and at nighttime we'd be absolutely freezing. So it's nice to have a thin layer. But since we've been burning so many of those fossil fuels, that means we've created what we like to call like rampant carbon dioxide. We've created too much carbon dioxide. It is stuck in the atmosphere. So I want you to imagine you have a nice thick blanket on. If you have a blanket nearby, go ahead and put a blanket around you. It's nice and thick. Maybe right now it's still a bit cold where you are. I know for me, it's one of our really beautiful days. So maybe the blanket would be a little bit uncomfortable, but not terrible. Like a month ago would be wonderful. The problem is you can't ever take off that blanket. It's going to stay on you and you're going to get hot and uncomfortable and sweaty. It might even cause some massive problems if you live in a place that's already maybe 100+ degrees in the summertime. So this can be an overall bad thing for the environment. But then there are also some specific problems that have to do with this heat trapping blanket. And Steve, I know you know a fair bit about how this can impact the world besides just it getting hot.
Absolutely. So let's just say, oh, I'm going to come on here and well, we're going to talk a little bit about what is happening because of the global climate change. And this was one of the questions that was asked: is what kind of damage are we getting because of global climate change? Well, see, the more carbon dioxide that keeps that re-insulates, it actually absorbs heat from our planet. The infrared heat that heats up the surfaces of our planet then gets re-radiated out into our atmosphere, and carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases actually trap that heat in. So the more carbon dioxide, the more heat. But this really throws off the balance of our entire weather systems, our climate. This is why we call it climate change. It's throwing in, we used to call it global warming because one impact, of course, is that we get warmer temperatures. But when we get warmer temperatures, it's like a teeter-totter. It throws off the balance to everything else that's going on. And so we might see more extreme weather patterns. We might see blizzards in areas like Texas. We might see larger scale hurricanes. In some areas, we might be experiencing flooding. And this is, could be if you're nearby the ocean. Well, this could be because the polar ice caps are melting, which is bringing up our sea levels. This could also be because of, your area is not used to the amount of rainfall that you typically get. So throwing off the weather patterns, throwing off the balance to our climate really causes some issues. And all too well here in California, we know one of the major impacts is the increased intensity and frequency, the increased scale of some of our wildfires. And so Lily's going to tell us a little bit more about like what these wildfires, how they've increased, and really talk about how we got to the point where we're getting mega fires now.
Yeah, and I also just want to say I see a couple questions in the Q&A, and actually a bunch of them we're going to be answering later on in the program. So hang tight. But you're getting some good ideas because we are going to get to those answers. So the fires we've been having recently in California, by recently I mean especially like 2021 and then before that, can be considered mega fires. So not every single wildfire is going to end up in a mega fire. It has to be under certain circumstances. One, it has to be pretty warm. Fire needs heat to get started. We just said climate change is like a big old heat trapping blanket. Increased warmth is going to cause some problems, going to potentially create a better likelihood of a big fire. Because it's warmer, things are drying out more. Steve mentioned how our weather patterns can get all messed up. So you might be more likely to have a drought, or maybe the rainfall is happening at like the wrong time. So the fuel can overall be really dry. Those things are due to climate change. Now, another portion of the mega fires that we've been having is due to forest mismanagement. We used to not allow much fire within the state of California, honestly, across the whole United States, because the people in power just didn't understand why fire was important. So it was suppressed for a while. That means there's more fuel buildup, more fuel, drier, hotter, you can get those mega fires. And they usually have a certain kind of way of acting. So I want everyone to make a circle with your hands, please. And now put that circle on top of your head. Mega fires are often crown fires. So just like I put a crown on top of your head, the idea with crown fires is that they climb all the way to the top of the tree. Now, as you see, as we go up the top of the giant sequoia, that's where all the branches and needles are, and that's a ways up. Coast redwoods would be even higher up. Crown fires get to the tops of the trees. For giant sequoias especially, that's very likely that they're going to die if they have a crown fire, but also it's more likely to spread to the other trees because if it's way up there, and let's say it falls down off of a flaming branch, it could spread from going so high up to so far down. So it's also damaging or very likely to be damaging to the communities that live around places that have the mega fires. Maybe, unfortunately, some of you know that all too well. So for the giant sequoias in the years 2020 and 2021, up to 19% of all giant sequoias died from these mega fires that were like crown fires. So not good. And again, part of this is due to forest management, but a big chunk of it's due to that climate change, increasing temperatures and messing up the weather patterns. Now, this is actually unfortunately extra worse, and I promise we're going to get to some good stuff in terms of uplifting stuff. But unfortunately, this is extra worse because giant sequoias and coast redwoods are actually a very valuable resource to help us fight with climate change. They do a great job of pulling the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And Steve, actually, this is kind of his specialty of talking about that.
That's right. So yes, these amazing forests, both the giant sequoias and the coast redwoods and all forests around the world are really important when it comes to combating climate change because they are known as carbon sinks, right? So atmospheric carbon dioxide is causing all sorts of issues, causing the greenhouse effect, causing warming temperatures, an imbalance to our entire weather patterns. It's very scary, but these trees are very impressive in the amount of carbon that they actually store and lock away. And this is all through the amazing natural processes that originally transformed our atmosphere to make this inhabitable to animals, right? Our atmosphere used to be a lot more carbon dioxide pre-animal. But let me tell you, it all goes into the natural processes of these plants. And let's just say that these trees don't always start off as massive redwoods, right? while they do regenerate and re-sprout from existing root structures, they start off as seeds in many cases. And these seeds are developed on something called the cone, because both coast redwoods and giant sequoias are known as conifers. Okay, so conifers are cone-bearing trees. And you might think, well, I've seen a sugar pine cone before, and it's massive, right? I want you to think about how big do you expect a giant sequoia or a coast redwoods cone to be? Would it be as big as a giant medicine ball, or maybe a pineapple, a pumpkin, maybe an apple, or a grape? Hmm. Well, here's the thing. I have a redwood cone right here, and I think Lily also has a redwood cone that she's going to show you. Me first here, though. Okay. On the count of three, let's see this redwood cone. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Are you kidding me? That's it? It's kind of disappointing because everything about these trees are so big, but not their cones. And even so, not their seeds. In fact, this cone will be pollinated by the wind. Going up the upper canopy needles, they have these little pollen cones that are going to blow in the wind, shaking pollen off, and it will land on this seed cone, then fertilizing that cone, and it will produce up to 100 seeds inside this little tiny cone. Meaning, the redwood tree, coast redwood, actually grows before it's a massive redwood. It's a little tiny redwood seed, about the size of a pepper seed. If you've ever had pepper seeds, maybe you put those chili peppers on your pizza. That's where it all starts. Now, let's see. Lily, do you have some cones to show us?
Yeah, so like we talked about before, these trees are basically siblings. So, not too surprisingly, they have a lot of similarities when it comes to the cones and the seeds and all that. Now, giant sequoias are the biggest tree, and they do have a slightly bigger cone than the coast redwoods. I'm not saying it's as big as like a giant sugar pine cone, but it is a smidge bigger. And you could tell though, it's got the same look. It's just overall a little bit bigger. And similarly, it's pollinated by the wind. And then once that all happens, it will develop. For these cones, it's about 150 to 200 of these seeds. So again, small, a bit bigger than the coast redwood cone, but still, when you think about how huge they can get, it's quite impressive.
Right. Okay. So then that little seed is going to find it has just the beginning amount of sugar that the plant needs to really get going. When it's exposed to the right conditions, the right temperature, the right amount of water, and activated by the sunlight, it'll germinate, putting root in the ground and a couple leaves up top. From here, it's up to the amazing process known as photosynthesis for these plants to grow. And what part of the tree does photosynthesis? The leaves. And for redwoods, here coast redwoods, I'm going to say are pretty cool because we not only have those upper canopy leaves, these are also the leaves that allow these trees to drink water out of the sky. But they also have the lower canopy needles that are allowing them to get sunlight in such a dark forest. Now, I know that giant sequoias have leaves too, but let's take a look at those.
Yeah, so again, they're siblings, right? There's some similarities. So this is the only way giant sequoia needles look. They don't have the two looks, so that's pretty cool for the coast redwood. But as you can tell, this is pretty similar to what one of the coast redwood needles look like. So same thing, we're just trying to get that sun. It's doing the hard work of photosynthesis. It just only has this one kind of look.
Right. So, I mean, yes, maybe a shortcoming of the giant sequoias. I always have to kind of poke fun at them, but no, it's all good. So, this leaves, both of these trees do this amazing process of photosynthesis. The leaves are green for a reason. Because green, well, it is the color that allows them to absorb just the right amount of sunlight. Sunlight comes through and hits these leaves. And then it's going to transform that sunlight into usable energy. Green is a good reason. Yep. Green is a good color for this because if you think about all the colors of the rainbow, we got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. Green is in the middle. And it reflects back green light while absorbing the right amount of energy from red and blue light. Now, this is the perfect amount of energy because they're going to use that energy to cook their own food, to take two ingredients to make into sugar. Okay, ingredient number one, well, it falls from the sky when the clouds get thick and heavy. For us here on the coast, well, we drink fog. And what do they get them from that fog? We get water. On the giant sequoias, they get that from snowpack that melts and is taken in through the roots. Both water. Okay, H2O. Ingredient number one. Now, ingredient number two, everybody, let's take a deep breath together. Breathe in. Oxygen. But then when we breathe out something that's known as a greenhouse gas comes out of the tailpipe of our cars and reacts with, yes, carbon dioxide, CO2. Water and carbon dioxide is the basic building blocks of plants. And using the power of the sun, the plant can take that water and carbon dioxide and turn it into sugar. By building that sugar, it has actually stored energy within that. That sugar has the sunlight energy stored in it. And if it wanted to live or grow, well, it's going to break apart that sugar, releasing the energy needed for life. And then it has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen to build different parts of the plant with. It'll build a bigger root system, a bigger trunk, and more leaves. But the thing is these trees are built to last, both of them. For the redwoods, they get their red coloration from a red substance that actually resists decay. And so a redwood tree that fell 200 years ago might take another couple hundred years to decompose, at which time all that carbon, well, a good portion of that carbon, will then be stored within the soils below, locking away that atmospheric carbon dioxide. Now, here's the thing. That little seed that we talked about weighed about 5 milligrams. And a full-size redwood tree weighs about 750,000 kilograms. So that's a huge difference. And a quarter of that entire weight is carbon from carbon dioxide. So these trees are carbon sinks. They store atmospheric carbon and help us out. But here's the thing. One of the major impacts of climate change is, well, mega fires. Now, these trees are both used to fires at different frequencies, right? Fires can actually be good for the forest. Mega fires, though, release all that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Seems to me like we have to have a better relationship with fires. And to talk about that, well, we're going to go back to Lily here.
Yeah, so like I said before, not all fire are those mega fires. Now let's just redo this real quick. Mega fires are often crown fires. So let's make that circle again with your hands. Let's put it back on top of your head. I like this example because also go ahead and don't hurt yourself, but knock on top of your head for me a little bit. Head injuries are notoriously bad for you. That's why you're supposed to wear helmets if you're on a bike or if you're doing something that might have heavy falling objects. Some people have to wear hard hats for their jobs. So mega fires are notoriously bad. But the other kinds of fire, the ones that are low intensity and often low to the ground, are not too bad. So back up a little bit so you can see on me. I want everyone to go ahead to touch the ground next to them. Ground fires, aka surface fires, are not too bad. Now I want you to knock on your foot. All right. Now stubbing your toe can definitely be painful. And I've broken my toe before. I know that was annoying. I had to wear a boot. But it's not like it impacted my whole body like, let's say, a massive concussion could. So the low intensity fires might cause a couple problems, but in general, they're very beneficial. It helps make sure that we don't have those big mega fires that release all that carbon that these lovely giant sequoias and coast redwoods are storing. So let me explain that a little bit. When there's a low fire, and let's say it's burning around like this area over here, it might burn this tree, but it might not burn some of the bigger trees. It's going to leave those behind. But what it does is once something burns, it becomes ash, and you can't burn ash. So once you get rid of the fuel, something has to grow in its place in order for it to come back. And in a giant sequoia forest like this one, what we call the fire regime, so how frequently a fire would go through naturally, and by that we mean historically speaking, maybe it was a lightning strike, or maybe it was our local Native Americans in Miwok and Washoe lighting fires. We would have it every about 7 to 30 years. So if you think about it, let's just say it's every 10 years, the fuel will get burned up. Not everything would go away because it's a lower fire, it's a lower intensity fire as well, but the fuel would get burned up and it would take a while for that to get replaced. So eventually you get to a point where it's really hard to have a crown fire just because the fuel up at the last fire, so there's not much left to burn. So it was kind of be like fighting fire with fire. It's good to have a fairly frequent interval. But there's other benefits besides the fact that it avoids those mega fires, avoids those crown fires. It also reduces competition. So if this tree burns up, then this giant sequoia isn't fighting with it for precious things like water, which, as we know, with climate change influencing the weather, there could be a variety in what the water level is like. So less competition helps out all the rest of the trees because they're not fighting over those potentially limited things they need. It also can actually help out these trees with growing new trees. Giant sequoias in particular really, really like a post-fire environment. It creates a couple really beneficial things. Besides the fact there's less competition, there's also a lot more space. You can't get really big if your seed lands in a spot that's really, really cramped. It also creates something called bare mineral soil, where all of this stuff, the leaf litter, gets burned away. This doesn't have any nutritional value for the plants. They'd rather it burned and then put the nutrients back in the soil. So it creates a space, creates a bare mineral soil, and giant sequoias in particular love a lot of sun. So more sun can reach down. And look, I got a picture of some baby giant sequoias growing in a post-fire environment. You wouldn't see these babies they see up at the front. There's actually even more babies back behind in that picture if this wasn't in a post-fire area. So this helps with what we call seed recruitment. It helps the plants grow because it's the kind of habitat they overall like to have. It also, and this is something we unfortunately know from COVID, helps stop the spread of disease and pests because if plants are growing really close to each other, we know during COVID time, we don't want to get into a crowded elevator because disease could spread. So fire helps things get spaced out because it clears away those areas, less likely things like disease. And for these trees, pests like maybe beetles, bark beetles, spread. So overall net health for the forest, less likely to create any sort of crown fires. It creates natural breaks. It could be a shade break. It could be a fuel break. So even if the fire did get started, it's a little bit less likely to spread. So we're a bit of a ways into our program, and I feel like we got to maybe loosen up a little bit. So Steve, why don't you lead us into a dance all about these different kinds of fire?
Right. So yeah, I mean, we've been sitting down, listening to us talk so much, and you know what's always good for this is a little bit of chance to move around a little bit. Now, I got some dance moves for you that really talks about the differences of a ground fire. So we go first step is hands down like this, a ground fire, because a ground fire is good. Ground fire is good. It's good and healthy. All right. And a crown fire is bad, right? We don't want it up in the top of the trees because that might cause it to spread real quick. Yeah, so no, we're going back down to ground fire. Ground fire is good, and the crown fire is bad. All right, one more time with that. Ground fire is good because the crown fire is bad. All right, and we were talking about torching because torching can cause spread to happen. So we're going to go, we don't want no torching. We don't want no torching. We don't want no torching. We don't want no torching, right? Okay. What we want is natural shade breaks. Natural shade breaks, right? And natural shade breaks, you want natural shade breaks. And we want bare mineral soil. So with your step foot, bare mineral soil. All right. Bare mineral soil. Okay. We're going to put it all together because a ground fire is
Ground
good
fire's good.
and a crown
And a
fire's
crown
bad.
fire's bad.
And a ground
The
fire's
ground
good
fire's good.
and a crown
And a
fire's
crown
bad.
fire's bad.
We don't want
Don't
no
want no
torching.
torching.
We don't
We
want
don't
no
want no
torching.
torching.
We don't
We don't
want no
want no
torching.
torching.
We don't
We don't
want
want
no torching. We want natural
natural
shade
shade
breaks.
breaks.
We want natural
Natural
shade
shade
breaks.
breaks.
We want natural shade
Natural
breaks.
shade breaks.
We want natural shade
Natural
breaks.
shade breaks.
And bare
Bare
mineral
mineral
soil.
soil.
And bare
Bare
mineral
mineral
soil.
soil. And
Bare mineral
bare mineral
soil.
soil.
And bare
Bare
mineral soil.
mineral soil.
What do you guys think? Good? Good job, boys.
Round of applause.
We got so many classrooms visiting us today. I wish that we could see them all trying to do this dance. Also, oh man. Well,
It
here's
is
the
what
thing.
it is.
What we were just talking about really talks about something that we are, as California state parks, are trying to do in order to better our climate change situation, right? It seems like we have to have a better relationship with fire because these trees can actually benefit from fire. And so I happen to know that a number of state park personnel, staff, have become fire trained. I am actually fire trained as well. We do prescribed burns. And to talk about that for a moment here is we're going to go to Lily and talk a little bit about how these prescribed burns, what are some of the ways that California state parks, as well as the state of California, are helping in the fight against climate change.
Yes. So if
Let's hear about it.
If you remember way back, I mentioned mega fires are partially because of climate change, partially because of mismanagement, and a fire was squashed for a while. Luckily, eventually, scientists realized, wait a minute, fire is beneficial. Giant sequoias need a pretty frequent fire. It varies depending on where you are. So like where Steve is, they don't need fire as frequent as 7 to 30 years. But for giant sequoias, we do need that frequent. Scientists finally started to realize that. So we've been trying to fix the past mistakes of squashing the fire by doing it ourselves. And that's called a prescribed burn. And it's called prescribed because it's very similar to like a doctor writing you out medicine and telling you what it is. They're only going to do that once they know what your problem is. They're going to be very specific on when you should take your medicine, what the dosage is like, how frequently to take it. It's very, very specific. So we go into a part of the park, and we've been doing prescribed burns here since the 80s. And we say, okay, this particular spot has been burned and far too long. Maybe it's been over 100 years. We got to go in and we want to burn it ourselves so we can keep it nice and safe. We don't want to risk a wildfire going through and creating a mega fire or crown fire. So we have maybe someone like Steve is fire trained, but we have a fire crew come on over. We have someone very specific called a burn boss. His whole job is to burn around giant sequoias. So this could be your job if you're interested. We have these flame torches basically, and they burn the fuel, but they have to make sure it's not too dry, so it's dangerous. It's not too wet, so there's no point. And the point is to protect the forest by using those low intensity burns, because as we said, it helps with disease, pests, lessens competition, so many benefits. But also for us specifically, we want to protect these giant sequoias, these world's biggest trees, and this helps them grow. So if you're going to a park, we're going to a sequoia park, keep in mind we're probably burning in the spring and or fall. If you're going to most other parks, there might be prescribed burns as well. So just kind of keep in mind if it's a grassland, if it's a coast redwood, if it's a chaparral area, there might be prescribed burns happening. So look it up ahead of time because it's going to be smoky. There's going to be some things closed, but this is our way to help these plants, help them sequester that carbon to help us overall with climate change. Now, not every single place is burning all the time. So the state does have some other plans to help increase that number of plants, sequestering the carbon, and it's something called 30 by 30.
Absolutely. So 30 by 30, this is actually one of our other plans to really increase the amount of forests and natural ecosystems that are storing carbon. Now 30-30, I have 2020 vision. Thank goodness. But we're not talking about 30-30 vision. We are talking about increasing the amount of green spaces like state parks, regional parks, like national parks. We're trying to increase the amount of green spaces protected by California up to 30%. And by what point are we going to do this? By 2030. So having 30% of all of California being protected green spaces so that we can have more and more carbon pulled out of the atmosphere and locked away within those ecosystems. Redwoods and giant sequoias, they are not the only plants that do this. We also have estuaries and kelp forests. We also have even meadows and open prairies all do carbon sequestration or carbon storage. And so by increasing that amount, we actually really are pulling more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it here. But you know what? Here, we all might have our own ideas of different ways that we can help, right? Us as individuals, we can help as well. Now, for right now, I want you to share some of those ideas. What are some ways that you or your community are going to help? How do we stop climate change? How can we reduce our use of fossil fuels? How can we, do better so that we can, help against climate change? Now, I know for a fact, so go ahead and put that in the Q&A. Typically, we like to use those questions only, but right now we're going to use the Q&A to add some of our ideas, different ways that we can help, alternative energies, different modes of transportation, and to actually highlight some individual things that we can do. Lily has a really good idea that she wants to share with you. That's all about it's all about how you can reduce food waste. And I don't, that
Yes.
kind of seems strange to me. Is how does food waste really, how does that create carbon emissions? So
Hey,
I'm
you know
going
what?
to leave it to.
That's a great question. I don't really blame you for asking. I also just want to point out that I am seeing a lot of your Q&A actual questions in there. They just have been difficult to tie into the program. So we'll do our best at the very end to address those because some of them are super duper specific. So it's a bit hard to answer right now, but we do see them, I promise. So let's get to that whole food waste thing. How can that help with climate change? Well, let's kind of break it down. Food comes from agriculture, from farming, from ranching, something like that. In that whole process, maybe fertilizers are used. The act of making fertilizers creates a fair amount of greenhouse gases. Actually, it's up to 5% of the total greenhouse gases emitted are from just the creation of fertilizers. So that's a big part of it. There's also all the different kinds of tools, equipment that are used that might also create greenhouse gases when it comes to agriculture. There's even more bits and pieces, but that's like kind of good bare bones. And then there's transportation. There's transportation to the production, maybe the processing needs to be required. There's a transportation to the grocery store. That production and processing, that also probably creates some greenhouse gases. Maybe it's in a factory, uses lots of energy. Maybe that energy comes from a source that's not the best. So we have transportation with emitting carbon dioxide from maybe driving mill truck. We have the processing, we have the agriculture. All those things unfortunately add up to some big emissions. I'm not saying don't eat anything at all because that's terrible. I'm saying that when you get food, eat it if you can. So then all of that stuff isn't for nothing. Because also, if you throw away your food and put it in a landfill, it's going to create methane. We haven't talked about methane much, but I mentioned very briefly that methane is one of those greenhouse gases. So it also contributes to the overall heat trapping blanket. So eat the food you have, If you can't eat it, like don't want to get it if you're allergic, because that's just mean, give it to somebody else. If they can't eat it, maybe if it's donatable, you can donate it to an entirely new source. Food banks are wonderful for something like that. And if all else, you can compost it. So you're not going to at least have that methane, and composting is a good way to then put nutrients back in the soil somewhere else. So reduce your food waste. A somewhat recent study from the USDA shows that 30 to 40% of all food is wasted in the United States. That's big. That's not just us, that's also things like the agriculture part of it and the production part of it, but it's really big. So, what you can do helps, and try to get your community involved too. If it's just you, that's great. But maybe you can start some sort of food donation program. Maybe you can look into if any restaurants nearby are giving away or selling cheaply their leftover food. Get your community involved in it so you can overall reduce that impact food waste has on climate change. And also, guess what? Your folks will have a smaller food budget if you eat the food that they might purchase, or maybe yourself are purchasing. So it can be pretty beneficial. Now, that composting idea actually ties in neatly to what Steve likes to talk about when it comes to a good way to solve climate change personally and community.
Absolutely. So here's the thing: we have lots of things that can be done. I've actually seen a couple of them in the comments or in the Q&A. Some of the people were talking about increasing the amount of firefighters and paramedics out there. Awesome. Yes, we need more people able to do this sort of work with prescribed fire. And we also had lots of comments about using solar panels, about using alternative forms of energy, driving less and walking more. These are all great ideas. Now, what I like to do is, for one, you have that compost now, of course, because in some areas you can compost. And this is a great way to add to nutrients in your soils that you can use for gardening. So at your home, if you have space, you can use compost to actually promote the health of your own garden. And get this, it can be plants that either exist that are native to your area that can actually help rebuild the ecosystem in which your house was probably built. So planting native plants, but also think about this: on the subject of food, if you were to grow your own food in your own garden, then you actually are doing a lot of ways. We talked about how transportation actually is a huge issue when it comes to carbon emissions, right? Well, by planting your own food and growing your own food in your own garden, you actually are cutting down on not just the amount of carbon dioxide that's stored in the atmosphere by locking it away in a plant that you will eat not to waste, of course, but it's also, you have cut down on the carbon emissions that it takes to transport yourself to the grocery store and back to get that food, but also to get that food from a farm to your grocery store also takes a lot of carbon emissions. So these are great. Great way to do it is get involved with gardening programs, garden clubs. Lots of cities might have garden clubs, and you can really do a whole lot by gardening. I mean, and it's also a great way to get outside more, and you can get a nice tan like me. Well, so there's probably a lot more that's coming on here, and I'm gonna bring
Yeah.
Lily back up here, and we can kind of go through and read some of those from the Q&A. But we have seems like we've got a lot.
Yeah.
We're
So
running
I
out of time.
see, I know. This is great. This is a great discussion. I see don't use so many plastics. Yes. And I see someone mention recycle. I'm going to kind of merge those two things together. So many of you have heard of maybe the 3 R's. Some of you might have heard of the 4 R's or the 7 R's, but they tend to be reduce, reuse, recycle. Now, the very first one listed there is reduce. I mentioned reducing food waste, right? Reducing is the first thing you got to try to do, because the production of anything can create greenhouse gases that contributes to climate change. So using less plastic, using less stuff if you can, is awesome. And then the stuff you do have, you should reuse them. Someone else mentioned using reusable water bottles. I know that both Steve and I have various reusable devices. I got my tea right here, right? It's important to have those. So reusing is very important. But the last one is recycle. So recycling is very helpful, but keep in mind, do these two things first. because the act of taking plastic or aluminum or glass or whatever else you might be recycling, paper, and then mulching it up and creating to something else does take energy. And sometimes things actually can't be recycled, even though you think they might be. So, glass, paper, aluminum, two thumbs up. Plastic, it can depend. So, check with your local community what actually is recyclable and then put those things in recycling bin. Otherwise, do your best to do the reduce, reuse, but also do those anyway as much as you can before you get to that recycle, because those are overall a nice idea. Let's
Right.
see what else. Solar
Well,
panels. I think we
yeah,
talked
we're
about
kind of
renewable
slowing down
energy.
on some ideas there, but we
Yeah,
have, like all these, yeah, using renewable resources like solar power, wind power, and water power are all great steps in the right direction. I've had often people say, like, hey, why don't I just grow more redwoods and go get a redwood seed and try and grow it and near my house? Well, here's the thing. Redwoods grow in a very specific region, either the coast redwoods growing out here in northern central California on the coast, or the giant sequoias, of course, in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. But they are very particular to their environment. And so they don't make sense in a lot of other places. What I would say is if you're going to grow a plant, some plant nearby you, think about those native plants, the plants that belong in those areas. The little changes that we might make in our lives, right, might be a little inconvenient, and they might not seem like they're making that big of a difference. But here's the thing. By talking about it more, by being here, you're already doing your part in fighting against climate change because you're learning about it, and you're probably going to tell somebody about what you learned today. I hope you do. But if you're making little changes like driving less, or walking to school, or you're starting a garden program, well, you're probably doing this and you're talking about it with your friends, and they're like, that sounds like a good idea and it sounds like fun. Well, with you doing these things and all your friends doing them together, we start to become part of a big movement and work towards a brighter future. And it's up to us, you, me, Lily, everybody. It's up to us to make the big change. And the forests, well, they're going to continue to do their job of really pulling back that carbon dioxide, and we can work towards a brighter future. All right, everybody. I want to
absolutely.
say thank you. Any final words there, Lily?
No, I unfortunately we weren't able to catch up with all the various questions, but if you have some specific thoughts about giant sequoias and coast redwoods, both of our parks have various email addresses or phone calls you can make because there's so much to talk about for giant sequoias and coast redwoods. And also both Steve and I do ports programs that are specifically about our parks. So we're doing lots of collaborative work here, but if you have some more specific questions, which I saw about coast redwoods or about giant sequoias, you can check out the Ports Cast or the California State Park Ports YouTube channel for various recorded programs. This program's also being recorded live. So you can go in there and look up any sort of information you want from that. Otherwise, happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day, everybody, and have a beautiful rest of your day. And, well,
Yes.
go out and take a hike if you can somewhere. I mean, that's my favorite part about this work, of course, is being outdoors. So go explore somewhere nearby you. All right, everybody, have
Please
a
do.
beautiful day.